I'm BJ, Billy Jack Rankin. I'm from Rankin, Texas. Grew up there and lived on a sheep ranch out of Big Lake all during my high school years. Went to University of Texas and started teaching and coaching after that.
Now, you live in Rankin, Texas. That's not a coincidence, is it? Those
It's
last
not.
names?
It was named after my great-great-grandfather. He gave the land that the town was built on.
There's a lot of history, and I got a little lost when I was looking into it, but the Lazy R, I had a couple names that came up, and some of the years started with 20 and some started with 19, but there were some in there with 18. Is that right? There was a Bearfield. Is that one of the names? I think
This came. I used to just brand my beef cattle with an R. And after I retired and got in the Longhorn business, I had to register my brand, and I thought, well, I'm retired now and a little lazy, so I just turned that R over on its side and made it the Lazy R.
So tell me a little bit about what this area of Texas is like. This is not what I expected.
This is growing up in West Texas. When I came out here, I was coaching and teaching in a little town of Grand Falls, which is between Monahans and Fort Stockton. And when I came here with the head coach, I was an assistant coach. I came here with the head coach and fell in love with the place. I'd never seen out there, I'd never seen a mesquite tree. All we had was mesquite bushes because there wasn't enough water. There wasn't much grass. I came here, and one of the senior boys got me a blind date with his sister who was coaching volleyball in Big Springs, and we got married the next year. And as one of the old families here, they were in the cattle business, and we decided this would be our home. I moved around a lot when I was a kid growing up, and I didn't want my kids to do that. She was established here, so I came here in '72, got married in '73. Been here ever since, and will be here till they scatter my ashes out across this place.
Well, you are a very interesting man in person, and I knew that going in when you said you're going to pick us up and look for the red Chevelle in the front. But I also knew that because I looked at your LinkedIn page, and I'm going to read a little bit of this, and then you expand at will from this. It said you're a ranch owner from 1974 to present, 46 years, is that right?
Right. We started with Brangus cattle in '74.
Okay, and then the next thing on that LinkedIn profile is your defense contractor. So tell me what you did. Tell me what you did there.
After I got back from Afghanistan, I had a couple of buddies, and I was there from July of '04 to August of '05. Had a couple of buddies that I'd been in the Guard with that were full-time guardsmen. They started a defense contracting business, and they were training civilian social scientists primarily that were going to Iraq to work with a military unit. And they had about 4 or 5 months of training, and they had a week of it where they introduced those people that had never been around the military, how a military unit operates and what they'd have to do to be able to be a cohesive force with them. They were getting ready to. Afghanistan wasn't big on the hot plate then, but they were fixing to have to start sending people to Afghanistan, and they wanted somebody with Afghanistan experience. So they hit me up. One of them lives south of Santa Ana, and I was in the Guard here with him forever. And he asked me if I would be interested in doing that. This was in February of '07. I said, well, how long would it be? He said, well, our contract runs out in September. He said, we work 1 week out of the month up in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I said, yeah, I could probably do that for 6 months. So I signed on with them, and after the contract expired. They rebid it and got it, and the people that were running the school liked what we were doing, so they wanted us to go to 2 weeks a month. They wanted to make our portion of it 2 weeks a month. So I did that for about two more years, and then they wanted to go to 3 weeks, and I said I can't be up here 3 weeks. So I'd go up for a week and come home and then go back for a week. I did that till 2011, and we lost the contract. So I did it about 4 years, and I was an instructor, you know.
But you actually got to be a little more in the thick of it too, didn't you?
Right. Those we had we kept up with some of our students after they got over there. They'd email us back and tell us how things were going. And having been there, and my buddy had been in Bosnia-Herzegovina years before, and we told them some things that they needed to watch out for. And most of them paid pretty good attention. They liked what we did, and hopefully we helped them be a coordinating part of that military unit that they were going into. They would go out and work with the locals in the villages to see what they needed. The other units before, the military units, had sent their people in there, and they would visit with the mayor or whoever was in charge, and he would tell them what they needed. Well, I found out in Afghanistan what the big shots wanted was what they needed. It wasn't necessarily what the people on the ground needed. So it created some problems, but I think we got to do some things that actually helped the people instead of putting money in the Malik, the mayor's pocket.
Well, you used your prior experience with the next thing on your LinkedIn profile, superintendent. You supervise the school district's 150 employees and manage the $10 million budget. So you're a logistics guy too.
I worked my way up the ladder. I came here as a teacher and a high school and junior high math teacher and boys coach. I coached football, basketball, track, and golf. And then I was the first junior. Braggs was growing at that time, and I was the first junior high principal that they hired. They'd only had 2 principals before that, an elementary principal and a high school principal. And I did that for 12 years, and then I got the superintendent's job. So I did that for 11 years.
And that sort of prepares you for the battle zone, right?
Yeah, I think it did. We were working with the Afghans to train them, so I'd had lots of training experience.
Okay, in your education it says Charlton State University's University Masters of Education, Superintendency and Educational Systems Administration, and University of Texas at Austin, BA in Mathematics.
Yes.
So
that was it. I was Austin from 65 to 69, and saw the Vietnam protest there. You know, lots of them had the long hair and the signs, and I didn't want to go to Vietnam. I'd had one classmate killed, another one wounded pretty badly that later died of those injuries. So I joined the National Guard in 1969.
So now, it also says in the About section, I've worked hard and I'm now spending my children's inheritance on scuba diving, golfing, snow skiing, and traveling.
Yeah.
Tell us where you went last week.
I went to St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands and had a good dive experience. Went with a dive buddy from Phoenix, Arizona. He's an old retired lieutenant colonel from the Marines, and also taught school after he retired from the Marines. A couple that I had never dove with from Abilene, husband and wife. He is an instructor in Abilene, and my dive buddy at Lake Ivy, she's the one that got me back in diving in 1998. She used to be an instructor out in Midland, and the 4 of us had a good trip.
This is all a part of your bucket list. Tell me about your bucket list.
Being an old man, I've got a bucket list. My bucket list is to dive all the islands in the Caribbean. St. Croix was number 23, and I've got about 8 more to go. There's some other islands, but I don't care about diving some of those. So.
Very interesting man. So tell me about how you got started in raising Longhorns.
Well, I went to the University of Texas. Of course, they're the Texas Longhorns. And I'd always wanted to raise Longhorns, but I'd always heard that you can't make any money on Longhorns. And, you know, I've experienced that they don't bring, when you take them to the sale barn, they don't bring the kind of money that the black ones do, or the red, white-faced ones. But we went through Brangus, and then we went through Brayford, and then we went through Beefmaster, and I had about 50 Beefmaster cows whenever I went to Afghanistan. And as a lieutenant colonel over there, I made good money. I came back and there wasn't anything to spend it on over there. So when I got back, I told my wife I'm selling the Beefmasters and buying Longhorns, and I did, and I've never regretted it. I don't make as much money, but I make enough money with my retirements that I don't need cattle money.
So you've lived on this earth long enough to be retired. I'm trying to say that delicately. Is the Longhorn a cow that is good for retirement? Because I watch these cattle come around us, and everybody thinks of the Longhorn as this feisty, mean, rough animal, and yet I could spit on him here if I wanted to.
You know, I've sold several calves, you know, that were yearlings. I've sold them to several people throughout the years because they're looking for pets for their grandkids. You know, they want something, and they say, do they make good pets? And I say, they're just about like a 600-pound goat. You know, they're the most docile animals that I've ever been around, and I've been around sheep, goats, all different breeds of cattle. But they're like pets, and they're hardy. They're pretty self-sufficient, you know. They can take care of themselves. Whenever I was raising beef cattle, it seemed like I always had to do something, feed them or do something with them. Longhorns, I can take off for a week and go scuba diving. They never miss a beat. You know, they can gain weight where beef cattle will starve to death. They'll eat just about anything,
including cactus.
The wires on my trailers, and I have to keep all my trailers behind closed gates.
But that's one of those. I'm assuming it doesn't always look like this here because you've had some rains.
No, it doesn't. We've got more grass right now than we've had in years. So.
And they've put. I mean, they're healthy looking cattle.
They are. This is the best they've looked in I don't have the kind of grass over the other place that I do here, so those look a little more like regular Longhorns. You know, you can see a few ribs, but they're fattening up.
I think, I don't remember if it was Bubba or Tom that was talking to us that said that on the trails, on the trails going northward, you know, all other cattle might have problems, but these guys sometimes put on weight because they were so good at converting meat.
They can forage.
Yeah. So tell me about the calving.
I once asked Fayette Yates, and my family and his family had known each other for years. I never had known him. He was a good bit older than me. I asked him, I said, how many Longhorns? Because whenever I had beef cattle, I was always having to pull a calf, and I'd lose calves, I'd lose heifers, you know. And I asked him, I said, how many Longhorns do you think you've owned in your life? He said, oh, I'm just going to estimate 10,000. I said, how many Longhorn calves have you ever pulled? He said, not a one. They're smaller, and they just kind of pop. And I've seen them being born. You know, they just pop out. Mama starts licking them, and they're up and going pretty quick.
Now they're said to be really good at hiding. They're more like a deer, I've heard. They hide them in the bush somewhere.
You know, if I've got one that's doesn't come up, and I count them whenever I feed them. If I'm missing one, I'll check to see which one it is, and you know, if I miss her for a couple of days, I know she's out having a calf, because they will. They'll lay out till the. I had one born in this pasture right here a few years ago, and it had just been born, and there were 2 or 3 buzzards around on the ground, and that longhorn, one of those buzzards would hop over there, and that longhorn would hook that buzzard, and she was guarding that calf. I had a buddy of mine here from San Antonio a few years ago, and we were over in that middle pasture, and we were feeding them. I was fixing to put the feed down. I had the sack, and when I've got that feed sack at the back of my truck, I'm the #1 attention. They don't think about anything else. My buddy is looking over at the far fence line. He said, "Look at that." I looked over there, and there were 2 coyotes over there. And those cows saw those coyotes, and it looked like a stampede running towards the coyotes, and they took off.
So it's not a passive protection.
No, they're very active.
But that's kind of what you need out here, right?
Yep. Because I've got beef cattle neighbors that, you know, they lose calves to coyotes, but I've never lost one to anything like that. You know, I've had a calf or 2 die after they got on up a little age for one reason or another, but they'll take care of their babies. And I've seen them lots of times when the cows are all out grazing. There'll be 8 or 10 calves, little calves, all laying together, and there'll be 2 or 3 longhorn mamas there with them, and the rest of them will be out grazing.
Conservation of resources to have nursery school.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell me how these cattle fall on the IQ scale of cattle.
I think they're smarter than beef cattle, and I don't know why. I always had lots of trouble with beef cattle. These longhorns, if I've got that sack of cake, they'll follow me anywhere. And they're easy to pen, you know. And I don't know why I think they're smarter. I just do.
We hear that a lot, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're problem solvers, too. And I suppose 500 years of evolution on this space, adapting to the environment, kind of you either get smart and make it or you don't.
That's right. That's right. Because there were lots of ways to fall by the wayside back whenever the Spaniards brought them over and they started running feral. You know, because there was lots of feral animals that would try to take care of them, so they had to learn how to survive.
So in the development of the animal and the development of the personality in Texas, there's an interesting parallel, because Texans are a different bunch. They are. But the Longhorns are a different bunch too, and in many ways they seem reflective of the personalities. Would you agree with that?
Well, they're the state mammal, so, and I think this particular breed of Longhorns, the old-timey traditional Longhorns, I think they have the same spirit as the old 4th and 5th generation Texans that are here.
And it seems to also be there's a mix of cultures and breeds in Texas too that seems to add joy and diversity in life. You celebrate it. And it seems to be the same way in the cattle, because they started from the Iberian stock, and then a little bit goes here, a little bit goes here, and after that they just kind of, they evolve over time here. So do you think that all parts of Texas are the same as this, and all of even the traditional cattle kind of develop the same, or is it a little different depending on where you go, both the area and the cattle?
I've heard people in different parts of Texas, like you made the comment, these are real fat. You know, if you go to South Texas and West Texas where they have Longhorns, they don't look like this. You know, they're more like the old time because there's not as much to eat out there. So I think cattle adapt to wherever they're living, and it shows. You know, there's some differences.
Well, that's interesting because people have different purposes for cattle, no matter what they're raising, no matter what breed, Angus or Longhorn, or even traditional versus a modern Longhorn, which is I'll call a cross for lack of a better term. But do you think that the traditional Texas Longhorn is a thing from the past, or do you think that there's something that it really has to offer the agricultural production system of today in terms of genetics or tolerance or anything like that?
That's hard for me to say because I'm in it because I just want to preserve the breed. Uh, the I think if a person got out and hustled the market, you know, the meat market, there would be some future in that because these are grass. They're a lot leaner. They've got more protein. They've got less fat than beef cattle, and they're just a you've got to learn to like it. You know, I've had some friends that I'll sell them a little Longhorn beef. I like those. You got to cook it a little bit differently. You got to know what you're doing and how to. And but my wife won't go out and eat steaks anywhere else because they say they don't fix them like you do. You know, but we've been doing it now a good while, so we've learned.
Well, I'm going to come back to the food thing in a minute because you have quite a few recipes up on your Facebook page, so I know that's one of your areas. But I did want to mention that you were the past president of the CTLR, or Cattlemen's Texas Longhorn Registry, and you're still a member. So tell me why you're part of this organization and what does it represent to you?
Well, whenever I got in, uh, there's a guy, I think you're going to go see him tomorrow, Frank Sharp. I was interested in Longhorns, going from beef cattle to Longhorns, and I talked to 2 or 3 people. Well, who should I talk to about Longhorns? And they said, go to Frank Sharp. So Frank Sharp really is the one that got me into the traditional Longhorn business. I bought a few from him. I bought a few from James Farr. I think you're going to go see him later, maybe. He's over in around the Dallas area. I bought some from Fayette Yates's son-in-law. I bought some from Sonny Detmer. I've got a few of Debbie Davis's. So I bought 50 and 15 from Enrique Guerra. So I bought some from all over, you know, and I've been happy.
So do you think that the registry is mostly just a registry, correct? It doesn't push a political bent or anything? It doesn't go out and have huge shows or anything of that nature?
No. Well, I'm a firm believer in registering the animals, you know. That's the only way we're going to know if they're really what we're trying to promote. If someone, now, when someone buys one from me, my bulls are all registered, all my cows are registered. If they buy a heifer from me, it can be registered without going through the DNA testing because the parents are both registered in the association. If you're going to register a bull, it helps if both parents are registered, but bulls have to be DNA tested. They also have to be inspected by 3 inspectors, 3 certified inspectors, and we train our inspectors. I do a lot of inspecting. I think, and we've got some members that raise good cattle, but they don't register them, and then whenever they sell them, sell calves from them, the people that buy them, if they want to register them, they have to be DNA tested. The cows have to be DNA tested if they're not from a registered sire and dam. So I'm a firm believer in the registry that we need to register them all.
So maybe it's just because I'm a city girl, but it seems to me like this is very much the equivalent of a certificate of authenticity, or maybe a title search when you buy something. You want to make sure that you have what you think you have, right?
That's exactly. If they're registered, you know what you're getting. You know that they're the old-timey ones that we are wanting to keep our breed in that narrow path.
Okay, so if you're just raising some freezer beef, it doesn't really matter.
No.
But if your whole breeding program, if you're going to start to breed these babies, you don't want to know 10, 20 years down the line that there's something in there that tainted your entire program in a way that you didn't want it to, right?
Right.
So what is it? What is the process of, we'll say, the inspection part? What do you do when you go to inspect an animal?
It takes, you look at the different characteristics, and we've got some little manuals that say, tell you what to look for in terms of the tail set and the horn set and the belly set and the legs, the face, things like that. And then the 3 inspectors will take a look at it, make notes if they want to, and then either thumbs up or thumbs down. And if 2 of the 3 agree that it should be registered, then they pass the inspection. Most of the times, if they're having to be inspected, they're going to have to be DNA tested. And I've inspected some that I'm not sure we'll let the DNA be the final deciding. I could go either way. It's got some traits I don't like. It's got some good traits that are what we're looking for. But it's a borderline, and those, they have to be 25% of the Debbie Davis knows all that. I can't remember. It's 25% Iberian or less than that. And
I think a lot of that's up on your website. You have a nice information section on your website.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of that's posted.
And I'm getting old and forgetful, and I can't remember it.
I'm right there with you. But that's nice, because people can say, okay, what am I looking for? And they can just go right up there. So if they want to get DNA testing, is that a really complicated thing?
It's not complicated. It costs $40 or $50. You pull some tail hairs and send them in to GeneSeek, which is out in California, I think. You send those tail hairs in. You have some paperwork you got to fill out, so they'll know how to send it back to Debbie. And they send the results back to her, and she contacts the people and said, well, it passed or it didn't pass. So
$40 to do that, and how much does it cost to register? So if you wanted to start to finish do that, what does it run?
And it maybe we just changed the people that do the DNA, and I've never had to do DNA except for a couple of bulls that I've had. But it's $15 to register them. You have to be a member, which is $50 a year to join the association. And then the cost of $40, $50, $60 for the DNA testing. So
for something that potentially is going to be the basis of your herd, that does not seem to be a big expense to me.
No.
Yeah. But it's your time too. So if you're going to invest the time in this animal, you can't get back the 20 years. You might be able to purchase new animals at a cost, but you cannot get back the 20 years of breeding toward a goal.
Yeah. If you get if you were to get a bull that wasn't what we were looking for, and you bred a lot of your animals to it, and then decided to get it tested, and it wasn't what we were looking for, you've got all that stuff that would never be able to be registered.
Yeah. Okay, so I have met, Debbie set us up with people to speak with, and most of them are from the registry on this trip, and some or most of them are real characters in life. And you have mad scientists and marketing and business and logistics planners and think tank personnel and geneticists and historians. That seems to be the thing, and sometimes that's all the same person. So I was curious, is that kind of the type of person that's drawn to the Longhorns, or is it a reflection of Texas, or maybe a little bit of both?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. You know, the people that are drawn to them come from, like you said, come from all walks of life. You know, I was an educator, and if you got a love for animals and you got a love for Texas, I think that brings you to Texas Longhorns.
I walked on Tom's ranch, and we came past a couple of breeds of African gazelle, I believe, and Appaloosa's next to that, the Longhorns next to that, and I think he maybe had an ostrich or two somewhere around the place. So,
probably did.
Yeah, and he knows that he knows the genetics of it. So he was explaining to us when we went out that the phenotype and the genetics can be that, you know, it may look like a Longhorn. He's got one cow that was absolutely perfect. He said, she's my ideal, but she didn't test 100%, so out she goes. And so that takes a lot of gumption to say, what is my goal? What is the higher purpose to that? He has both kinds of animals, but he says the Longhorn that he wants to perpetuate for the conservation purposes is the genetic type, tested genetic. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So I have to ask, everybody has a strong suit. So if I say to Debbie, who's your historian? Who's your geneticist? Who's the guy that knows, you know, lifestyle, whatever it happens to be? What would your thing be?
I think I was elected president because they knew I knew how to run a meeting and organize things. I think my specialist would be the record keeping, because I keep good records, and whenever we had a field day out here a few years ago, had our meeting in Brownwood, our annual meeting of the members, and then we came out here and looked at my Longhorns. I know a guy that raises the other kind of Longhorns, and it was between here and Brownwood, and we stopped by and looked at some of those, you know, some of those that have the horns out like that, and we looked at the differences between what we're looking for and what those were, and then we came out here and looked at mine. Of course, I had my record book out, and everybody wanted to see that record book. They liked the way I kept records.
Well, and when it comes down to reality, it's just like the house. If you have a house, you want somebody who searched the title on it and knows how to document that. Yeah.
And when I was president, that was one of the things that I emphasized, was everybody needs to keep good records and register your animals. You know, why have a registry if you're not gonna? I had a couple of members that wanted to, well, if we sell something and it's not registered, why don't we just give them a certificate of authenticity? I said, well, you know, you can do whatever you want, but they're not registered.
Okay, I want to ask, the Vivo the Steer is probably most people's first recognition of quote-unquote Longhorn, and he's a mascot for the University of Texas in Austin. So I don't know if he's a Longhorn or a Longhorn cross. Do you know by chance?
Yeah.
Is he cross?
I know the people that raise that breed of Longhorns, and they're like a lot of beef cattle people. You know, those people that raise those Longhorns go for two things. They go for bigger bodied animals, and they go for horns out that they can measure and have contests. And Vivo is one of those. So he's got real big horns, and he's a big animal, you know.
I mean, you know, you say big. You took us into your garage and showed us that one set of the horns off of that steer in the garage, and it's not a small thing. I mean, that's a huge rack.
And he was 11 years old.
And they're beautiful. They've got this gorgeous twist, and they're unique. And I can't see turning that down for any reason. That just seems beautiful to me.
Yeah.
So big is not. I mean, these guys are not small. They're smaller than some cattle, but they're not miniature cattle.
No, no.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I'd pick that one. So, do you think that there is a place, because again, this is, and you don't have to answer this one if you don't want to, but there is an argument between the traditional conservation and the crossbreeding. Do you think there's a place for both of those things depending on the perspective of who's buying it? And if so, is it just a question of semantics? You just call it something else.
I've talked to some people, and our definition of the traditional Texas Longhorn is the ones that came up from Spain, you know, and just covered Texas. Their definition of the Texas Longhorn is what came out of the feral Texas the feral Longhorns and the Hereford bulls that the Texans brought and bred to those. And that's where you started getting the bigger animals. And now I had a guy that came from their association to our association, and that's what he told me. Now, I'm sure you wouldn't find that in any of their literature or anything, but he said that's what they think, that the true Texas Longhorn was what came out of the Hereford bull and the feral Longhorns.
Because there were multiple times, and again, bookkeeper, so correct me if I'm wrong, there were multiple times in the history since the Spaniards brought them over, and I think it's the 500, Ponce de Leon brought them to Florida and Hispaniola in 1521 now. I mean, that's a 500-year anniversary. So there was a period of time up until, I think it was the late 1800s, where they were just the feral cattle, a little bit of crossing between Hispaniola and Florida and Mexico and the Texas region. Mm-hmm. And that was roughly when they were pretty much the feral period. And then, am I correct that the first beginning of a bit more of that dilution with European breeds was in the late 1800s?
I think that's probably right, or maybe a little earlier than that, because I know my great-great-granddad came here as a kid in the 1870s, and I'm assuming there were people in West Texas before that. So, I don't know.
So then I think again in the 1950s or 60s they started mixing the Watusi and other breeds, I think.
Yeah.
And that's when the horns got big.
That's to get the horns.
Yeah. And they are definitely beefier looking cattle. They're bigger. But I would be really curious if you put those side by side with some of these guys in that harsh stuff we just came from in the, you know, that region close to the border, and actually everything until we got pretty close to this area. You're not going to make it unless you're pretty tough.
I know it.
So I wonder about the survival ratios. If you truly want something that's going to make it and is going to calve easily and is going to be able to survive on very little, has anybody done studies on that? The differences between the two? Because there's no way around that. You're adding a little less of that adapted tolerance, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any studies.
I'm going to have to ask Tom about that.
I was a history major, but I didn't do near as good in that as I did math, so I don't know a lot of history.
Okay, so now the one thing I wanted to come back to, you mentioned you are a foodie, I think, because on your Facebook page I've noticed there are recipes galore.
I don't know who put those on there, but I've got some Longhorn recipes. Most of them just are cooking the meat slower and at a lower heat, letting it marinate in whatever you're going to season it with, you know, for overnight before you cook it.
So it's not like when you would cook a traditional beef steak from another breed, and you would cook a Longhorn steak, it's not just the cut, it's the length of time and the temperature that you cook a Longhorn?
I cook it a little longer at a little lower heat.
Is that because of the marbling, do you think?
Well, there's no marbling in the Longhorn, so that's just what I was told by one of my customers. She started buying from me right after I started selling it. And she came back with and told me some different ways to do it, and that's what she recommended, and that's what we started doing, and it's been good.
Well, the closest you're going to ever get to marbling is right now on that green pasture, huh? I don't suppose you have any your favorite recipes or ways you like to cook. Are you a steak guy, or what else do you cook?
I do all the grilling. I tell you what we've learned is on the roast and everything, and we even like to do the sirloins, put them in a crock pot and cook them for 6 or 8 hours, season them good, and they just cut them with a fork. They fall apart.
That's beautiful.
So.
And summer sausage, I noticed that one was up on your webpage too. Have you ever made summer sausage with them?
No.
It looked yummy.
I don't know who put that on there. I've been hacked a few times on stuff, Facebook stuff, and everybody tells me, change your password. I said, I don't want to change it. I'm hoping somebody will steal my identity and I can start all over.
Well, whoever's posting up there, they have good taste because they look yummy. So now, is there anything that you want to add that we didn't cover, or that you think that the registry might have that's need to put up there that might be interesting?
I've told you everything I knew. Some of it I made up because I really didn't know it. So
we won't ask which is which.